everyone, and welcome back. Ready to dive into a topic that's, well, let's just say it's not always the sexiest thing in the project management world.
You're not wrong there.
But it's one of those things, where understanding it can make or break your project.
Totally agree with that.
So we're talking about, you guessed it, earned value management, EVM, and we're really going deep on this one.
Deep dive is right.
We've got excerpts from the actual PMI standard on EVM, and we're going to unpack it all.
Should be interesting.
Now, thankfully, I'm not alone in this. I've got our expert here with us who, I gotta say, has a knack for making even the most complex project management concepts, dare I say, understandable.
Well, I try. I think everyone deserves to understand these tools, not just, the hardcore project management gurus out there.
Exactly. So before we get lost in the weeds of like formulas and acronyms and all that good stuff, I'm curious, from your perspective, what's the essence of EVM? If you had to boil it down to its core purpose, what is it trying to achieve?
That's a great question. And I think the best way to explain it is this. EVM is like a magic holding up a mirror to your project, right? It's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about understanding the story that your budget, your schedule, and your actual work are telling you.
Ooh, I like that. A project with a narrative.
Exactly. And then using that story, that narrative, to make informed decisions about your project.
So it's about getting a deeper understanding of where your project actually stands at any given moment, not just where you hope it stands, right?
Precisely. It's about looking at the hard data, analyzing it, and using those insights to steer the project in the right direction.
Okay, love that. So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here. Our source material dives into some crucial EVM terminology. Planned value, PV, earned value, EV, actual cost, AC, and budget at completion, BAC. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but these are the building blocks, right?
Once you grasp the concepts.
So break it down for us. Let's demystify these terms a bit.
Okay, so imagine you're building, let's say, a custom motorcycle, right? Your dream project.
Love it. Keep going.
You've got your design, your budget, and your timeline all mapped out. So think of your plan value, your PV, as the detailed roadmap for that motorcycle build. It outlines the anticipated cost of each stage, the engine, the frame, the custom paint job, everything.
Okay, so it's like the blueprint with cost estimates attached to each part of the build.
Exactly. Now, your budget at completion, or BAC, that's your final destination. It's the total approved budget for the entire project, the motorcycle build in this case.
So the total cost you're aiming for from start to finish.
Exactly. Now, where earned value comes in your EV, it pinpoints your current location on that roadmap. It's the value of the work you've actually completed so far. Let's say you've assembled the engine and finished the frame. The EV would represent the value of those completed components.
Okay, so it's not just about arbitrary dates on a calendar, it's about the actual value of the work accomplished at each stage.
Precisely. And then you've got actual cost, your AC, which is basically the fuel you've burned to get to that point. It's the actual costs you've incurred for those completed components.
Right, so it's like tracking the expenses for those engine parts, the frame materials, and so on.
You got it. And by comparing these values, PV, EV, AC, against your ultimate destination, your BAC, you start to get a really clear picture of your project's health.
And that's where the real power of EVM kicks in, right?
Absolutely. It's about asking those critical questions. Are you on track? Will you complete the project on time and within budget? Are you getting the value you expected for the money you're spending?
And in the case of our motorcycle analogy, will we actually end up with a bike that runs?
Exactly. EVM helps you answer those questions. It gives you the data to make informed decisions throughout the project lifecycle.
So it's like our project GPS, keeping us on track and making sure we're not veering off-road into like project disaster territory.
I like that analogy. EVM, your project GPS.
And it's not just about the overall budget and timeline. Our source material also digs into different ways to actually measure the work itself, especially when it comes to like discrete effort, apportioned effort, level of effort.
Yeah, it gets a little granular there for sure.
It does. And it seems like it's getting at this idea of like how different types of tasks contribute to the overall project value.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, not all tasks are created equal.
Totally. So how would you differentiate these different efforts? Like, what's discrete effort in this context?
So think of discrete effort as those are the tasks that have a really clear, measurable output.
Okay, I'm with you.
Something like, going back to our motorcycle analogy, installing the engine, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
You can easily see the progress there. It's either installed or it's not. There's like a tangible outcome.
tangible, measurable progress.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But then what about those tasks that are like essential to the project,
Right.
but maybe not as easily quantifiable? Is that where those other efforts come in?
You got it. So like apportioned effort, think of that as the supporting work that goes hand in hand with those discrete tasks.
Okay, so it's like interconnected.
Exactly. Like in our motorcycle example, you're installing the engine, but you've also got to do quality checks on the parts, maybe safety inspections, right?
Right, makes sense.
All those things, they're essential, but their value is tied to the progress of that main task, that discrete effort of installing the engine.
So it's like acknowledging that it all works together, that each piece contributes to the whole.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But then there's this level of effort thing,
Right.
which the source material calls non-measurable work,
Yeah.
which sounds, I don't know, a little tricky in the EVM world where everything seems to be about measurement.
It can be,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that not everything that's valuable is easily quantifiable, right?
Right, totally.
So level of effort, think of it as the stuff that keeps the project moving forward, even if it doesn't have a super concrete deliverable.
Yeah.
So in the motorcycle analogy, it could be like the ongoing project management itself.
Right, coordinating everything.
Communication with like the parts suppliers, maybe researching the best engine parts to use.
It's like the strategic underpinning of the whole project.
Exactly. Those activities, they're crucial, but their value is more about the time you're investing in them rather than like a tangible output you can point to.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not that it's not valuable, it's just that we measure its value differently.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point about EVM. It encourages us to acknowledge and value all types of work, not just the stuff with like a clear-cut deliverable.
Right, it's about the whole ecosystem of the project, not just the individual components.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about these different types of effort, but let's shift gears a bit and see how EVM actually plays out in a real-world scenario.
Love it.
Our source material uses this smart building project as a case study.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting about this example is how it highlights the importance of control accounts in EVM.
Absolutely. Control accounts are essential for effective EVM.
So for those who might not be familiar with the term, what exactly are control accounts?
So think of them as like manageable chunks of your overall project, each with its own mini budget, mini schedule, mini scope, everything.
Okay, so you're breaking down this massive project
Right.
into smaller, more digestible pieces,
Precisely. And each piece gets its own set of metrics.
which allows for what? More granular tracking, early detection of issues.
You nailed it. It's like instead of looking at this huge, intimidating project as a whole, you zoom in and focus on these individual control accounts.
Right.
You can really get a handle on what's working, what's not, and make adjustments as needed.
Okay, so it's like divide and conquer, but for project management.
Exactly.
And in this smart building example, how do they actually use control accounts effectively?
So in the case study, the team actually used control accounts to catch a cost overrun early on in the project.
Oh, wow, that's huge.
Right. Because they were tracking things so closely at that granular level, they were able to identify the issue, figure out what was causing it, and course correct before it became a major problem.
That's incredible. It's like having a built-in early warning system for your project.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's all about proactive project management, using the data to anticipate and mitigate potential problems.
Right, not just reacting after the fact when it's like too late.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got these control accounts, we're tracking all this data, but it's not just about crunching numbers, right? I mean, our source material also talks about using visuals, things like S-curves, bar charts,
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
even burn-up charts to represent this data.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets lost in the EVM discussion.
Really?
Yeah. People get so caught up in the numbers, the formulas, that they forget the power of visualization.
Right, it's not just about like spreadsheets and data dumps.
It's not. Visualizing EVM data, it can make these honestly kind of complex concepts so much more accessible, so much more understandable.
It's like our brains just connect with visuals in a different way, right?
Totally. It's one thing to see a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, but when you can see those same numbers transformed into a chart or a graph, it just clicks differently.
Right, it tells a story.
Exactly. It helps you connect the dots faster, identify patterns, see the trends.
It's like the difference between reading an instruction manual and watching a video tutorial. The visuals they just make sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with EVM, but there's one final point from the source material that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of applying EVM in agile environments.
Interesting. It's not something you always hear about.
Right. Because at first glance, it seems a little counterintuitive, right?
How so?
Well, agile methodologies, they're all about being flexible, adaptable.
Right. Iterating as you go.
Exactly. Whereas EVM, at least from the outside, might seem a little more rigid, focused on sticking to the original plan.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
But our source material seems to suggest that EVM can actually enhance agile projects.
And you know what? It absolutely can.
Really?
Yeah. I think the key here is understanding that EVM is not about being rigid. It's about being adaptable.
Okay, so it's not about forcing a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that EVM is a tool. And like any tool, it can be adapted and tailored to fit different contexts.
So how would you approach using EVM in an agile environment? What are some of the key considerations?
So instead of focusing on traditional milestones, maybe you focus on the value delivered in each sprint or iteration.
Okay, so you're aligning it with the Agile framework.
Precisely. You might track story points completed rather than just tasks.
Okay, so you're measuring progress in a way that makes sense for Agile.
Right. And the beauty of it is, EVM still gives you that framework for measuring performance, identifying variances, and making data-driven decisions even within that agile context.
So it's not about abandoning the principles of EVM, it's about adapting them to fit the agile methodology.
It is.
So it's like, instead of being this rigid framework, EVM becomes more like a flexible tool that can actually guide agile projects towards success.
Exactly. Think of it as like having a compass in a constantly changing landscape.
I like that.
The compass doesn't dictate the terrain, but it helps you navigate it effectively. Make sure you're still heading in the right direction.
It gives you that sense of like direction and progress, even when the path itself might be winding.
Precisely. And that's the beauty of EVM. It's not about being confined by the plan. It's about using the data to make smart decisions and navigate whatever challenges come your way, whether you're in a traditional or agile environment.
It's amazing how versatile EVM can be,
It really is. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly. But before we wrap up this deep dive on EVM, I want to bring it back to our listeners. We've covered a ton of ground here, from the basic principles of EVM to some pretty nuanced concepts. So for someone who's maybe just starting to explore EVM, or even a seasoned project manager who's looking to integrate it more effectively, what are those key takeaways, those aha moments that you hope they walk away with?
For me, the biggest takeaway is this. EVM is about empowerment. It's about moving beyond just checking boxes and tracking numbers and really understanding the story that your project is telling you. It's about using data to make truly informed decisions, anticipate potential roadblocks before they become major issues, and ultimately, steer your projects towards success.
So it's instead of just hoping for the best, you're using data to create the best possible outcome.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
I like that. So EVM, it's not a crystal ball, but it can definitely give you some pretty valuable insights.
It can. But it's important to remember, like any tool, it's only as good as the information you put into it.
Right, garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Exactly. So as you start, implementing EVM in your own projects, make sure you're collecting accurate data, using the right measurement methods for different types of tasks, and most importantly, really taking the time to understand what the data is telling you, what it means in the context of your specific project.
So it's not just about plugging numbers into a formula. It's about interpreting those numbers, using them to make smart decisions.
Absolutely. It's about using EVM as a compass to navigate the often complex world of project management, and ultimately to create something amazing.
I love that. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this incredible journey through the world of EVM.
It's been my pleasure. Always happy to talk about EVM.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, happy projecting.